Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back with another episode of our top 100 movies of all time. And I know some of you were probably wondering, where the heck have we been? We bounced off from Monday, Tuesday, and now we're going on to a Friday here because of my schedule being updated, and it was just the easiest time to make this happen this week. Probably going to be a little bit sporadic until Survivor season starts. Then once Survivor season starts, we're going to try to just follow up Survivor pretty much every time, which means Wednesday nights for those of you who have no idea what Survivor actually means. So that's what we're going to be doing with that. But tonight we're on to our number 70. We are into our fourth grouping of 10 here, beginning that. And 31st episode. Pretty unreal to think about that. We're supposed to be talking about Alien, which would have made 3 weeks in a row. The Two Towers, Alien, Empire, and then we kind of kept going. Jaws, Pulp Fiction. I mean, we had a really good run there. But we aren't talking about Alien because instead we're going to be talking about Moon, because I have Alien much higher on my list. And we're going to be talking about Ituma Ma Tambien, which I love that it's actually called Ituma Ma Tambien, because so often when a foreign film is Englishized, whatever you want to call it, they always give it an English title. And rather than that, they just keep this one as Ituma Ma Tambien because it says everything you need to know. And it is one of the most classic lines of the movie. Anyway, thank you, Jordan Alford, who says, wow, you guys have gotten a 70. Great job. It feels great. It feels good.
It does.
And it's pretty amazing that 30 weeks ago when we did this, the Survivor cast for season 41 was probably, I don't even think they'd started going out. They probably hadn't even been cast yet. And now it's been announced. So yeah, we've been rolling. John, welcome to the podcast. What's going on?
Not a whole lot. I mean, we had the time off, and I took the time to finally visit my parents for the first time in a year because of COVID. So didn't watch as many movies as I normally would, yet still ended up watching 14 somehow.
Yeah, that's crazy. I have been busy as anything, and so my pace has really slowed down in terms of movies. I'm glad you're able to watch. Glad you're able to see your parents and also able to watch movies at the same time. Can't let one thing take priority over the other. I don't care if it's your parents, John. But anyway, so what? Neither one of these movies is all that popular. I think we start with Moon because I think it's less popular. And I think Ituma Ma Tambien is at least Cuaron. And if you're a film fan, which you probably are, if you're listening to us, you probably know enough about Cuaron. So let's, and I'm probably butchering his last name, Cuaron. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'm from New Jersey, and my accent makes me say Cuaron. But I know that that's definitely not it. But it's Alfonso Cuaron. Moon, though, Duncan Jones, David Bowie's son. And this is filling in for Alien. And we actually had a discussion about this 30 weeks ago when we were making out the list. John wanted to put Blade Runner here, and I told him he wasn't allowed to do that because I refused to watch that movie again because I've seen it 5 times and it's garbage. But John, why other than that did you end up choosing Moon as your replacement here?
Moon does hit a lot of the themes that Alien does in the beginning portion of it. The idea of like isolation and everything like that. But it's also just this overlooked movie that just doesn't get enough attention. So I thought it would be really good to discuss.
Yeah, and I think that Moon, it's unfortunate that it's not more seen. Sam Rockwell gives a great performance in it, and it is a really captivating movie. I love the idea of, these people out on this base, and they don't like, he doesn't know, he thinks he's going home, but all his memories have been implanted. And we've talked about this a lot with a lot of John's movies, but what does it mean to be human? And here these clones are with all the memories and everything, but what are they to be human? And I think what's most devastating about this movie and about the way that this one unfolds is that Sam Rockwell, the character in this, Sam, the Sam version that he is, the one who gets hit by the harvester and then they are trying to say is dead, isn't really that far along in the process. He might only be like the 4th iteration of Sam's, because his daughter is now, I think, 15 or something like that. Yeah. And mom had just died. So it's kind of devastating because it's not one of those where it's, I'm looking back, 200 years and it is what it is. It's very recent. And I think that's what makes this such a compelling and powerful movie, is that this is somebody who kind of woke up a little earlier than they were supposed to, and a little bit earlier than we're used to seeing in sci-fi movies.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about it, is that it's framed in such a way, like I said, it really focuses on like you think you're sitting down to this movie, and it's this movie about isolation and a man dealing with isolation that we've seen in so many sci-fi movies before, right? Like we've seen this theme in 2001: A Space Odyssey, we've seen this theme in Solaris, and all these other space films with small casts. But then you're just hit with that harvester when you realize, oh, this is actually a movie about like the moral implications and the ethical implications of using clones to do this work and then disposing of them afterwards.
Yeah, but still giving them all of the human elements that you don't need to necessarily give to a clone, giving them something to work for. And I think that's what's most interesting about this movie is it's this desire to need to be a part of something bigger, whether that's just having the family or something. Because why would Sam Rockwell's character continue on doing what he's doing if he didn't have something that he felt like he was going to return to, or something that he felt like he was going to have on the other side of this? And so like it's this thing of, yeah, they're clones and all that, but if they kept them as just straight robots, what would they do? And even we see in this movie the robot character voiced by Kevin Spacey, we see that robot even having some human elements throughout of making decisions that are kind of going against what you would think. It's not Hal, it's not, it's very different. It's a helpful robot, because at the end of the day, anything I can do to help you is what I'm supposed to be doing. And when he realizes that Sam needs help, he continues trying to give him help.
Yeah, and actually the character of Gertie is really interesting in this, because they do set it up that he's like this Hal-like character, that he is this like malicious robot who's concealing the truth and like seems in on everything. But as we get further through the film, we find out Gertie is actually there to help. And that also adds to that theme of the idea of what is consciousness and what makes someone alive, and what's it mean to be alive, and how can we treat things that are alive? Because both Gertie and Sam are artificial life forms. They're artificial lives that were created by man, but they're both sentient beings with their own ability to make decisions. So what is right and what is wrong in the way that they're treated?
Yeah, and I always complain, like when being somebody who went to get an MFA, when you would turn in an early chapter of something and you leaned into tropes, people would be like, oh, this is just cliche and blah, blah. But in order to not be cliche, you need to know the trope. And it's funny because if you don't establish that you understand the expectations of the audience early on, then when you subvert those expectations, it means nothing. And I think Moon does a very good job of knowing that in this genre, robots are normally bad. Robots are normally evil, and robots are normally a part of the plan and being used by man to keep somebody else down. It lets you know right away that this is something that you've seen before. And when Sam wakes up and he goes walking over and Gertie turns off the thing and says, oh, you weren't supposed to be up yet. It's like, okay, we've seen this before. But in order for it to be meaningful later on, we need to have that scene, and we need to have it established that, yes, this is the trope and this is what generally happens in these movies. So I think Duncan Jones, and I forget the screenwriter's name for this, but I think they do a very good job of diving into everything we're used to seeing in this type of movie and then twisting it just enough, but not so much that now it's just nonsense, chaos, whatever the hell is at the end of Sunshine. It's very much, the first 2/3 of Sunshine.
Yeah.
Where it's okay, we're getting there. And those to me are the best sci-fi movies, especially when it relates to space. We have seen so many space, alien, moon type movies by this point. You need to do something different. And this movie is so simple, but it has enough different that keeps you going, are they clones? Is one of these the original? What's going on here? Or is it clones? Is it that simple? And really, it is that simple. There's no massive twist to this movie. It really is that simple. It's just the fact of everything is stacked against them. And now how can they possibly succeed? And as we see with older Sam, he has no chance of succeeding.
Yeah, and like this is kind of like a turning point because this movie came out in what 2009.
Same year as District 9, actually.
So this is kind of our turning point, one of the major turning points in sci-fi, where we started not having the artificial intelligence as the villain in all of these. Mm-hmm. Yes, we had like T2 beforehand and everything like that, but they're still fighting against artificial intelligence in that movie. Whereas in Moon, we're at this point where it's like clearly the villains in this are man. And it was definitely a societal change in the way we are approaching artificial intelligence at the time. And as we became closer and closer to realizing actual artificial intelligence, we had to go through the moral quandary of, if we're creating this life, how is it different than ours?
Yeah, and this movie hits the depth without being pretentious. And I think that's what's most impressive about this movie, because you bring up a good point. 2009, even in District 9, the aliens are the good guys in that movie for the most part. You know, it's the humans who are the bad guys. So we're starting to see this trend, this switch, this as they would say in the MFAs, this othering, you know, where we're starting to change that perspective. But a lot of movies, like I was just clicking around on Letterboxd, and there was top 10 sci-fi movies of the last, decade, and Upstream Color's in there. And to me, Upstream Color is the most pretentious garbage I've ever seen in my life. Like, that's a half-star movie in my opinion. I hate it with a passion. Shane Carruth can't write, so he pretends he can write. Like, that's how I feel about him. Other people love him, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, a lot of sci-fi becomes sci-fi when in reality it's just a drama that doesn't know how to tell its story the right way. So it tells it in this pretentious fashion to try to make it seem like it's something deeper than it really is, and it's not. Moon just says, screw it. I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, get into every single thing you need to see right away, and that's it. Like there are no, like, for a great sci-fi movie, and I think this is a great movie, for a great sci-fi movie to have as few of twists as Moon has and still be compelling for the full hour and 40 minutes is unbelievably hard to do, especially when I could sit down and watch this with my 80-something-year-old grandma, and she'd be able to follow this movie and be like, well, that was weird, but not be like, what was that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that is kind of, sci-fi does often have this tendency to be this place where people like to push the boundaries of what is enjoyable in film sometimes. And Moon doesn't do that. And part of it comes down to the fact that I think the small cast really helps with this. I think the fact that the cast is literally Sam Rockwell and Kevin Spacey's voice really helps with that.
Oh, yeah.
But despite these heavy themes that we've been talking about already, the film still has this like breath of like lightness to it, where it doesn't feel like it's just pounding these themes home all the time. They're there, but you're actually just more interested in how are these two clones going to respond to the fact that they realize that they're clones.
Well, and I think it's one of the things that might turn people off from this movie, but it's actually something that I think actually propels the movie into a different direction, is how quickly the second Sam Rockwell is willing to admit that they're just clones and just buy into it right away. And I actually think that makes the movie more compelling, because now we sit there and we say, okay, like we now have two opposing forces. If they're both working together to just say, no, we're real, it doesn't work. But you have this guy who comes in and he's still fresh enough that he says, something's not right here. Something's not right. Like, it's kind of like the opposite of Woody and Buzz Lightyear, which is funny, but it's the same story, where Woody knows he's a toy. Buzz doesn't think he's a toy. Buzz is new. No, I'm a real space ranger. And now you flip that and you have the Buzz Lightyear character being the one who's been around the longest, because he cannot admit to himself that all of these last 3 years could possibly be for nothing. While the other one can sit there and say, I just woke up because they thought you were toast, and that's why I'm here. And I also saw this weird robot thing talking. It could see it a little bit easier than the one who's been in their ways for so long. And I think that that's a really bold decision, because you're making a clear veering in a direction that most people aren't expecting you to go in, but they pull it off.
Yeah, and I think part of it comes down to it's such a logical conclusion for the second Sam to come to.
Mm-hmm.
You're clear, like this obviously been here longer, been doing this longer. There is no doubt in this Sam's mind. He has to be the clone. The question, because usually in this type of instance, we're looking at a film that's trying to say, which one's the real one? But that's not what Moon's getting at all, because it is focusing on like the existentialism of it. And it's not like the question of which one's the real one. It's both of these individuals are independent and can forge their own paths from here. So taking that logical step of, okay, well, I literally found you, so you clearly, like, you could be the original, but I can't be.
Yeah, and so having that realization of, if I can't be real, if I'm not the first, then you're probably not either. I'm telling you, like, that is such bold filmmaking, because that is just something most writers and directors of sci-fi, they try to keep you in the dark for possibly too long. And I think that's what bogs down a lot of really good ideas in this genre. We'll get to Planet of the Apes, but that's one that saves its big moment for the end. But also, it's giving you enough throughout of like revealing, like, yeah, these are apes who are like, who are acting like human, and the humans can't speak and all that. And like, you can get through that and still have the big ending. Sometimes sci-fi movies, they have so much with the ending that they don't really know how to get there. And they're scared to give the audience too much, because they want to keep you in the dark a little bit. But this is a movie that elects to say, hey, like, we're going to have a clone know they're a clone while talking to the same type of clone that doesn't realize they're a clone and can't come to terms with it. It makes sense though, because it's almost like, it's like how if you grow up one certain way, you always believe it's going to be that way, or you believe that that's how it's always been. And if somebody comes in and opposes your ideas and your beliefs, you don't buy it. And not for nothing, as an audience, we're sitting there watching this going, is he just tripping? Like, he's bleeding, he's losing his mind, he just got in this accident, did he just get a concussion, and now he's having these visions and he can't really control what's going, like, we don't know. But that subtle, not even subtle, but that decision that they make in this movie to have the accident and then have new Sam waking up and be like, oh, you hit your head. And it's that, and you're like, okay, he hit his head, like, whatever. And then when he drives out and he picks it up the other Sam, you're like, this isn't the same one. It's such a, it's really good decision making here. It's not going to be on the level of an Alien or I don't know, some other sci-fi movie or Space Odyssey, whatever. But it's thinking on that level of what can we do that's just different enough, but that's going to create fanboys. And not for nothing, Moon created a lot of Duncan Jones fanboys. And had he never made Warcraft, he probably is having himself one hell of a career right now. But he did make Warcraft, and that was a really stupid decision.
Yeah, and the thing is that they set up this idea of, Duncan Jones really takes into this idea of, we're not going to show you everything. We're not going to tell you everything. We're really going to make you piece together what's going on here. I mean, there's a film theory. I just watched a video on it this weekend, and it's about the idea of, don't present the audience with 4, present them with 2 plus 2. Right? And that's exactly what's happening in this movie, because before the crash, we get glimpses of visions that Sam's having. So, like, we as the audience are like, have to piece together. It's like, is this real? Is this a hallucination he's having because of this accident, or something that was happening before this accident? And it puts us into the mindset of the older Sam.
Yeah.
And it's just a really good way of building this world and making us feel both the ways of both of our main characters here, as really they're just trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, and I often wonder, like, what Duncan Jones obviously is David Bowie's son, so that has some sort of impact on things. But He was this was his first film as a feature-length director. He's coming in. I wonder what it was that drew Sam Rockwell so into this, because this is a difficult concept to pull off, but it's incredibly well pulled off. Those scenes where they're playing ping pong against you, I don't know how they did that. I have no idea how they did that. That seems difficult. But like, I wonder what it was that just drew Sam Rockwell so into this idea and into the execution of this movie, because it is really, really well executed all the way throughout. But you know, Duncan Jones was an unknown at this time, and taking these chances, and not for nothing. This trailer, I remember blowing my mind. Like when this trailer first came out, like the trailer might be better than the movie. It's so well done. So I don't know, man. I try to wonder, like, to be able to just have Kevin Spacey and Sam Rockwell, how was Duncan Jones able to pull that off immediately?
Yeah, it's a really great question. But once again, it kind of goes to prove, and we've talked about this with Sam Rockwell before when we were talking about 3 Billboards, like he's a very underrated actor.
Oh, yeah.
With his performances. And the fact that he's able to pull this off with 2 very distinct characters in this film, I think one of the best places where he shows it is the walking on sunshine scene. It's just like he goes and he does this, and it's just like there's this one side that's being serious and this one side that just doesn't want to accept anything and is trying to ignore it all. And it's just such a brilliant performance from him. And then as we get further into the movie and older Sam starts degrading, which brings up a whole nother idea of like planned obsolescence and things like that.
Yeah, because
that's clearly something that they were anticipating, that like these things
every
only
3
have
years
they have a 3-year shelf life, so it doesn't matter. It's just phenomenal, the performance he's able to put in this film.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And so I think, like, when I think about like Sam Rockwell in this movie with the visions and all that, and his wife, who's barely in this movie, is in it in like the small moments. But this is another trope of sci-fi. This whole like remembering your loved one who's back on Earth or back wherever, and how can I get back to something that Alien doesn't do at all. I don't even know if they mention anybody other than whatever they have, whoever calls them in and says, "Hey, go here." I don't think they mention anybody from their real lives. But this is such a trope of, oh, I'm just thinking about my family and how can I get back to my family and how can I do all this. So up until the scene where he actually finds himself, this is a very standard sci-fi movie. And here we are talking about it not as a top 100 movie, but as one that deserves some recognition and can be included on a list like this. Like, and this has good reviews. This is like a well-received movie, and it starts off very easy, very simple.
Yeah, it's a very easy concept to digest too, right? Hey, we've run out of we're running low on resources on Earth, but we found this incredible resource on the moon. But we don't need to risk a bunch of people to do it. It just takes one person to go there and run this. And that's it.
Yeah.
Simple concept. You throw in this whole moral quandary of it all. It was a brilliant film. Films don't have to be overcomplicated in order to be good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I forgot that it started off the way it did. I forgot that was like the whole thing of like, we've run out of resources. We must now go to the moon and we must harvest. I totally forgot that that's how this movie went. I had seen this in years, and I was wondering, actually going into it, since it came out the same year as District 9, and since District 9 had such a different feel for both of us now that we've like gotten older, I was wondering, was I going to be disappointed in this one as well? Like, was this going to be too much? And I wasn't at all. Like, I was invested the entire time. Hatchet Man said a long time ago, the score of Moon is also impeccable, and it really is. I mean, this is a phenomenal score, and it adds a lot to the movie because it has that desolate, isolated type feel to it that is very hard to pull off in a score, but when you do, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. It adds all that emotion to all these scenes because it gives you that feeling of isolation and being in space, but at the same time, it really does also kind of show the emotion of the characters as well.
Yeah. And I always think, I actually think, and it's a very underrated movie in my opinion, but when Damien Chazelle did First Man, And there's this scene near the end of that movie, and people were like, "Oh, all this movie does is like make a hero out of Armstrong and blah blah blah." And I totally disagree with all those critics, and I don't think that they understand like the underlying themes of a movie. There's a scene in that movie where Ryan Gosling is staring out at Earth.
Mhm.
It's completely silent. There's nothing going on, and he's just standing on the moon. And as he's looking, and it's just silent, and he's got like a blank look on his face, it's, in my opinion, and I think what was, maybe I'm wrong because it doesn't seem like many other people have this opinion, but a lot of it was in that moment of what was the point of all this? We watch him go through all the training. We watch I forget the name of the character. We watch characters die. We watch his relationship with his wife start to dwindle, all that. And then we're left with, what was the point of all this? And I think Moon does a very good job of hitting on like those similar themes of like, is this, if we had to go this route, is this actually worth it? Like, is this existence for one person worth it so that the rest of society can live and do whatever it is that they're doing? And so like those two, the way that Damien Chazelle shot the end of First Man, and the way that the scenes on the moon are shot in this with the score and using either silence or just these little like, you know, peck moments. I don't even know what you would call it, but it's like staccato. Using those moments, I think it does such an incredible job of just hitting on that like loneliness and desperation, and leaves you wondering like, yeah, everybody's, oh, we're going to build a moon base and we're going to do the blah, blah. Would it ever be worth it to have to live in that gray, black, mundane way of life? Probably not. That's kind of what I get from this movie.
Probably not. And like the film just is set up in a way where we don't really know what's happening on Earth because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we left alone until we get to those final moments when Sam gets back to Earth. And it's you might miss it if you're not paying attention to it. But all the like the news stories and stuff at the very end of the film, because they're all kind of talking over each other, and this idea of the moral quandary of it and like what is Sam as a clone is really put into question. I mean, you have that one of the comments is, I don't know what he is, but he's an illegal alien.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's so crazy because like Earth, people on Earth don't know this is happening, presumably, based on the limited knowledge we have of it. But like their response is to shun it away, throw it away. Yeah. This isn't happening. We don't know what this is. We don't have to accept it.
So now here's my question to you. Where is the original Sam?
I'm assuming he's the one on Earth.
He is. Okay, good. Because that scene I always find to be devastating. Yeah. When he is watching, he's talking to his daughter, and the daughter's like, Dad? What? No. And then you hear the voice, and that's it. That's all you get. But I'm like, that's Sam Rockwell. That is him. And to have that idea of, it's almost like Sam probably worked for this company, gives his DNA, never once sets foot on the moon. And they flew in all these clones, and that's all it is. That's how it feels to me. And that actually makes it a little bit more devastating, in my opinion, because you're like, wow, the original Sam's at home while these clones are suffering over all of these things that the original Sam has done with his life.
Yeah, that's how it feels to me as well. And then we get into like the moral question of like, is it right to instate these clones with those feelings in the first place?
Yeah.
And those memories. We talked about it a little bit already, where it's like this idea that that's motivating them to do the work and like get their 3 years done. It gives them a good idea as to why they're there, and like lets them kind of like not go into existential crisis mode. But is it ethically correct to do so? And like, because now you've given this person an entire life that's just not theirs.
Yeah. That's something that we see come up a lot with sci-fi movies. I mean, it was something that we saw with Dark City. It's something, you know, have you ever actually been to whatever beach? No. So, but Moon's a good one. If you haven't seen Moon, go check out Moon. Moon is fun. If you haven't seen Moon, you just heard everything about Moon, but still it's fun. So go check it out. John, what was the best movie you watched this week?
Ooh, I ended up watching a lot of movies further up on my top 100 this week.
Okay.
I hit 200 of the year, so I decided it was a Casablanca watch type of day.
Mm.
And I started my James Bond rewatch recently to get ready for the new one coming out next month. So
I swear it's coming out. I swear.
Yeah, it's coming out eventually, I promise. And then when I was with my parents, my sister and brother-in-law wanted to watch No Country for Old Men, so I watched that. But if we're talking about first watches this week, easily Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Oh, wow. First time, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, Humphrey Bogart and Houston in that movie are wild.
So good.
They are so good. I mean, the desperation in that movie. And that's why, like, when we were talking about the African Queen, because John liked the African Queen, and I think the African Queen is poop. But we were talking about, to put it maturely, we were talking about that. But when you see some of the other classic Bogart movies, like his AFI Top 100 and all that, man, the African Queen just pales in comparison to what this guy was capable of. And to me, like, the African Queen is just because Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart are on the screen together. I mean, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, that's a brutal movie. That is brutal. The desperation in that movie is brutal.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And it did kick this, like, Humphrey Bogart kick for me. It's why I ended up watching Casablanca as my 200th film again. Because I was just like, I'm just going to keep watching Bogart movies.
There you go. Hey, that's not a bad place to be. Watching Bogart movies is not a bad waste of time. For me, it was Basic Instinct. Have you seen Basic Instinct?
Not in a very, very long time.
Yeah, so I pretty much, I hope not too long, because I pretty much just had like a graphic sexual movie watching week, because Y Tu Mamá Tambien and then Basic Instinct, they kind of do this whole like sexual identity thing in a very different way. But Basic Instinct is awesome. And I always knew that movie because of Sharon Stone and how that turned her into a star. And it was just like this erotic thriller with the ice pick and blah, blah, blah. But the twists and turns that are in that movie, I thought it was also a movie that was well received. And I looked it up and the reviews on it aren't very good. And I am really surprised because I don't know what more you can want from that. So that movie starts off with, and cover your ears, anybody who doesn't want to hear, starts off with a graphic sex scene, followed by a graphic murder. And then the first line of the movie has the word fuck in it. And I said to myself, if you don't know what this movie is by now, you don't know, like, then you like just stop watching. And so it is very much doing what it wants to do the entire time. It is hammering it home that this is an in-your-face, over-the-top film noir, but it is a phenomenal mystery. And I think it is so much fun to watch. Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone are dynamite. I love it. I think it's a great movie. And if you haven't seen it in a while and you can handle a lot of violence and a lot of sex, because there's a lot of it, it is so good. So good. So check it out, John.
I will.
Speaking of a lot of sex, let's talk about Y Tu Mamá Tambien, because, hey, she's even in the bunch here. I've seen this movie a bunch now. This was kind of what got me into Cuaron. I liked Children of Men when I first saw it, but I didn't really get it. Now I like Children of Men more. Actually, I don't know if I have what I have higher on my list, because we haven't talked about Children of Men yet, but I believe that I actually have. I already have Children of Men.
Yes, you did. You did.
Okay. So I prefer this one to Children of Men. And this was the one, like, I saw Children of Men first, but this was the one where I was like, this guy's doing something. And when I watched this movie for the first time, I probably didn't understand it all. Whatever. But it's just one of those movies where it's so on the nose, but it's also like able to keep the humanity to it. And once you figure out what the narration is doing, which is telling the story in a novel, because whichever one is it, Tenoch, he wants to be a writer. Yep. And I think essentially this is his novel. And actually the writing in the voiceovers, which sounds so mundane and like, why are we hearing this? It's almost like it's being an excerpt from that novel. Once you realize what's going on with that, and this is a heartbreaking movie, and it is really a devastating movie, but it's also a very fun road trip movie, which you don't like. It's hard to balance those two things. A lot of road trip movies do one or the other really well. They'll be really fun, and they won't necessarily pack it home at the end, or but those little side notes of, he would never fish again. Like, that sticks with me. Because, like, oh, all of a sudden they came, the development, now he works as a janitor, he will never fish again. Like, that's brutal.
Yeah.
And I think this was, in my opinion, this is Cuarón's best storytelling. Maybe not his best movie, and I think I have it ranked as the highest one on my list out of all of his movies. I just want to make sure of that, just in case there's one I'm not thinking of that I'm like, oh no, duh. But I think that in terms of storytelling, this is just his best because it is telling the story of two young men who are going through some sort of sexual confusion, finding themselves, whatever you want to call it. And it packs in this romance with this aging woman who has nothing left. And we find out at the very end of the movie, she has cancer and is going to die. And that's why she's just giving in. And it just balances those two things. It's top notch. It's top notch writing. It really is.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And especially when you consider, like, if we're classifying this into like a genre or like a subgenre of film, this is just a coming of age story.
That's all it is.
And it's so nice to see a coming of age story like this and not like the heavily Americanized coming of age stories we have, where there's, I mean, a lot of our coming of age stories in the last couple of decades have been either like huge like comedy movies, or like even if we go back to like Hughes movies in the 80s, right? They still have that like levity to them and really kind of focus on like the humor aspect of the coming of age, and like, but the like growth of the character is like there, but they're always going to balance it out with the humor. And this one doesn't do that. Yes, there are some very light moments in it that feel great, but once we get to the point in the film where Julio tells Tenoch that he slept with Anna, like it's a heavy movie from that point on. For until we got like 20 minutes left in the movie after that. But it's just such a great way to portray that coming of age story that makes these type of movies so relatable.
Yeah, and that's coming of age stories done right. There's nothing better because everybody's done that. You know, if you have a sci-fi movie that's done right, still not everybody's lived we've never been astronauts. We've never done anything. Like, we haven't encountered aliens. Like, and I think that's why when a coming of age movie is done right, I have so many of them near the top of my list. And whether it's Moonrise Kingdom or Everybody Wants Some or Y Tu Mamá Tambien, like these types of movies about like self-discovery, when they can be done small but still feel so big, it's so interesting. And yes, I agree with you. 80s coming of age movies are so bad in my opinion. I don't like John Hughes movies. I think John Hughes movies are corny. Man, I don't understand. Like, and it's one of those things too. Like, I will sit down and watch a John Hughes movie, other than Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is phenomenal. But I will sit down and watch a John Hughes movie with somebody who claims to love John Hughes movies. They don't laugh. They barely smile. And then after it's over, I'm like, so what did you love so much about that? And they're just like, well, it's just like so good. And it's like, you're remembering this as way better than it actually was, which the nostalgia behind those movies, I think, is what carries them through. And I think that in the early 2000s, and I'm sure there's obviously some throughout this. I mean, even Paper Moon could be considered a coming of age movie in some sort of way, but because Tatum O'Neal's a child and she's trying to live in like, Depression era. But, around this time, we started to see a little bit more of like mature coming of age movies. And I think that started to bleed also into the romantic comedies, because this comes out in 2001. 3 years later, you have Sideways and you have Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind come out. And even though those two movies aren't coming of age movies, those are movies that are very much about a very distinct moment in these people's lives, where they are kind of going through the same thing that people go through in coming of age movies. Like Eternal Sunshine is a coming of age movie for a romantic relationship. And so you have all of these elements, and people will get mad at me for saying this, but I think it really all started with American Beauty, because American Beauty essentially made a coming of age movie about a guy going through a midlife crisis. But it was the exact same style. It was the exact same kind of thing. And we see that just being built off of so much in the early 2000s. And Y Tu Mamá Tambien is one of those movies where they take the Lester Burnham, Kevin Spacey character and push it to the side as the tertiary character, while instead they bring Thora Birch and Mina Suvari into the middle of it.
Mhm.
And I think it's really fascinating when you start to look at what Alan Ball did with American Beauty and how you can see so many elements of it moving forward. It kind of changed the genre of this style of movie, of like whatever you want to call it, coming of age, drama, comedy, like dramedies, whatever you want to call it. And I think Y Tu Mamá Tambien is one of the best versions to build off of that, because it's able to keep you in the youthful moment and in some of the moments where you're disgusted by what they're doing, some of the moments where it's hilarious, but then also hit you with the gravity of, why is this woman who just got cheated on by her husband traveling with them? What was this doctor's message that she got that we don't know about? It's keeping you in all of these different circles the whole time. And the motorcycle person scene is one of my favorite ones, when she's talking about the guy on the motorcycle. And it's like, oh, why didn't you marry? Oh, because he got killed. And he was 16 or 17, whatever. It's like, it hits you every time.
It sure
and it's
does.
Not cheap shots. They're not cheap shots, but it hits you every time.
Yeah, and I mean that's the way that these type of movies need to work, and it's what makes these movies so good, and it's why people find comfort in them. You're hard for us to find someone who likes films who says they don't like a coming of age story, because it feels like us. And as we're sitting through the beginning of this film, where we're just being introduced to these characters, and yes, we have to get through the sex scenes first, but
get through them.
You know what I mean? Like, the sex scenes have to end for us to learn it's okay. They're all quick anyways.
Yes, exactly. And actually, and that's the one thing before you keep going. The one thing is the sex scenes in this movie are all character development. I think that's also something that's impressive that a lot of American audiences, and I don't want to sound pretentious because I'm American, but, and trust me, I'm one of those people who watch these, but what the hell are we like? But this is definitely one of those movies where like those scenes are so intentional and it's actually building the story. Much like the one in Network with Faye Dunaway, which you talked about last week, but that one is building on that story. So continue.
But we see Tenoch and Julio just as like regular teenagers who've just finished high school or moving on to like further education, trying to figure out their lives. And I think one of the biggest thing is 5 days later, they just like accept boredom into their life. And it just becomes their routine. And it's like, yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah. Where you're desperate for what's my next step. And I always say with like a movie like this and in a movie like American Beauty, like I was saying, but the big one here is The Graduate for me. I always say that The Graduate is something that everyone thinks about. Yes, that's about a man who just graduated college and he's interested in the woman. But there is the same thing from the other side of the woman who just graduated college. Now she's interested in man. So The Graduate is a movie, but it's something that everybody thinks about, but nobody acts on most of the time. But that movie does. Y Tu Mamá Tambien is the same thing. After we get done with high school, before we go off to college, we're just going to travel around. We're going to drive. We're going to do whatever. We're going to go with this hot chick. We're going to go do like, you talk all this stuff. But this movie goes there to a place that most people only talk about. And at that point, it almost becomes like a fantasy movie of what would you do in this situation? What if you really did just had all the time in the world? No worries, because you got money and you got a car and we got this hot older woman who wants to come with us. What would you do? And most people would say, okay, like I'm going to go watch TV. That's what I'm going to do. But this movie takes you to that other place of acting out on the fantasy. And I don't mean the fantasy in the sexual way. I just mean the fantasy in general of acting on these things that you don't think are actually possible. That road trip is a fantasy. To travel out to the beach is a fantasy. The way Chewie is living his life is a fantasy. And I think that's why it's so devastating when Chewie's never going to fish again, because it's the end of that fantasy. It's the end of that getting into the real world. And that's exactly what's happening to the two main characters in this movie. They're having their last adventure, and now they're going to go out and we're going to have very, very civilized talks over dinner and blah, blah, blah. Like,
Mm-hmm.
It's never the same. It's never the same. And it goes back to The World's End, John. See, and that's why I love The World's End.
Of course. Yeah, and I mean, it all culminates in that ending narration where it's like they never see each other again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's life. We've all experienced that, where it's like we used to have this very good friend that we would go on these adventures with, and then something happens and you just don't talk to them anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just hits so hard, especially with like the development that we see of these two characters on this trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we see them go through the ups and downs, and we see their friendship challenged at levels. We see everything. So we see them at their rawest moments. We see them when they have nothing, when they're frustrated with each other, when they hate each other, when they love each other. Like, we see it all. And so, yeah, like it's just it's helped by the fact that like the three main actors in this are all great at acting.
Mm-hmm.
And you have Cuaron, who's a great writer and a great director and all this stuff. But yeah, the whole like we'll never see each other again. What I think makes it also brutal is that you know that that's being written by one of these two guys. Like, you know that that's being written by one of them as I can confirm with you, we never saw each other again. Mm-hmm. And like you said, I mean, we all have that one person. We all have that friend who we did some, like, stuff with and blah, blah, blah. Now you don't talk to him. You haven't talked to him in years. Mm-hmm. It happens. That's just what happens. You just hope it's not going to. And in the moment, you don't think it will. Because everything always seems so extreme in the moment. There's that Arcade Fire line of it seems so important now, but you'll get over it. Like, it's so true, because everything in the moment seems like either the highest high or the lowest low. And 2 days later, it's not going to be the highest high and it's not going to be the lowest low. And that's the thing in this movie. Like, they forgive, they move on, their girlfriends, all that stuff. What are they going to do? Oh, they're going to go say, it is what it is. It is what it is. That time it feels important. Now, who cares that they went and cheated on them with Italian men? Who cares?
Yeah, and it's even punctuated by the scene where Louisa's in the doctor's office and she's doing the test, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, I don't often think about I more think about the present than I do the past or future.
Yeah.
And it's like, this movie is about the present. It's about embracing the moment, but it still has that past and future looming over it the entire time.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about like Cuaron's direction, because obviously in Children of Men, it's got that epic tracking shot that nobody knows how he did it. I don't think anybody ever will figure out how he did it. But in this movie, there's a lot of really long takes in this movie that clearly the actors were just running with it. And one of my favorite scenes is at the end, when they're sitting there and they're actually starting to reveal everything to each other. When they're getting drunk and they're at the outdoor thing. That's like a 7 or 8 minute shot of just them talking and rattling stuff off and drinking beers and having a good time. It's so, like, again, it's so simple. And yet it feels so powerful, and it's so incredibly well directed, down to the point of she goes over, give me a number. They put on a song. She comes back. She's dancing with them both now. Like, to have that be the buildup, how much of that was scripted, how much of that wasn't, how much of that is just Diego Luna and Gael Garcia Bernal, and I completely forget her name every single time, but she's also in Pan's Labyrinth. How much of that is just them being really good? Because every time they shout over to Chewie and the other guys, they almost look confused that they're being talked to. Like, hey, I thought we were just extras in this scene. Yeah.
It really just goes to show, like, we don't know personally exactly what happened here, but it does feel that, and it feels so real because of it. Right? And I mean, clearly most of this was scripted, because the title of the movie's in this scene.
Well, I think they probably said you got to get there at some point.
But it's just feels so real, and it feels like this relief after the tension we've had for the previous 30 minutes of this film.
Yeah,
and a lot of it does come down to that the simplicity of this shot. It's that idea again of like simplicity versus complexity in film. Sometimes the simplest option is the best one, and that's what this was. We see all the characters at the same time. We see exactly how they're responding to each other, and because of that, we know exactly the emotion Cuaron's going for in this film.
Yeah. And I think he nails the emotion. I think I think this movie is it's very much just about being in the moment, living in the moment, doing all of that, and just being young and stupid. What do they call themselves? Or what are the cowboy? What is
Oh,
the cowboy thing?
I did not write it down, but I should
I
have.
forget, but they
Yeah.
have their 10 code mantra or whatever that everybody has to follow and all that. Like, it's just all those little nonsense things that then when you get older, you look back on and you're like, well, that was embarrassing. Like, what am I going to
Mhm.
do with this? But at the time, it's funny. It
Yeah.
is what it is, and it's like it's how you're living your life because you're just in that moment and you don't see. See, the thing is, when you're 30, you see yourself as 20. Like,
Hmm.
you can see that happened. You know what that was like. When you're 20, you
Yeah.
barely know what you were like when you were 10. But when you're 20, you don't see yourself as 30. So
Hmm.
you don't know what you're going to grow into at all. And so, like, this movie, like, they're so in that. And I think because it's got that narrator the whole time who does know what these young people grow into. So I
Hmm.
talked about with 20th century women.
Hmm.
Um, when Dorothea is talking about her own death
Yeah.
as she's existing still, it's devastating. And I think when you can have that almost peek into the future of, damn, my 30-year-old self can see this, and my 20-year-old self is now kind of able to see my 30-year-old self. That's really heartbreaking.
Hmm.
And it brings a different layer of questioning, like, what's going on here, and why is this important and why is this not important? So yeah, I love the style of this movie. I just think it's so well done.
Yeah, it is. And it we've talked about how it's so familiar to us, like the themes of it and everything, but it's so distinct in the way it's portraying those themes.
Yeah.
It just feels so unique and so wonderful because of it.
Yeah. No, it does. And it's funny because Cuaron never made a movie like this again. Like
Hmm.
Roma is a version of this. Roma is a it's obviously a totally different movie, but it is like very, character based.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, like with his career, he has one of the broadest filmographies of any director ever. He's
Hmm.
got The Little Princess, he's got a Harry Potter movie, he's got Roma, he's got Gravity, he's got Y Tu Mamá Tambien. He's all over the map. I mean, he's all over the map. He can make small movies, he can make big movies, it doesn't matter. But um it's it's just, I mean, it's, I don't know. I just think it's fun to watch him as like a director as well. I think he
Hmm.
does a really good job with some stuff.
Yeah, and he knows how to pull performances out of his actors, and that's very clear in this film.
Mm-hmm.
I the the threesome scene is so impactful because you just see it all in their faces in that scene. Like
Mm-hmm.
everything is just like this understanding, and as Tenoch and Julio start kissing, it's just like, wow, like they just understand each other so well in this one moment, which
Mm-hmm.
is what makes it so heartbreaking when right afterwards it's like, yeah, they never see each other again.
Well, because yeah, they can't live with the fact that that's like it's something they want to forget about. It's something that they
Yeah.
don't. I mean, now they both go on and they have wives and all that. Like they just push it out as if it never happened because that's what they
Hmm.
do. This whole movie, they don't talk about the important stuff. They talk about the nonsense. They
Yeah.
talk about the stupid shit. They can't get to the deep stuff, and when they do, they just argue with each other.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's part of growing up, right? Is the coming to that acceptance that you can't just talk about the stupid shit all the time. You have to acknowledge what's going on, and you have to. One of the big things is like this idea that they have to work together in order to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Because after their argument starts, it just gets to this point where there's so much tension that everything feels like it's going to fall apart and like the adventure's not going to happen and stuff. And then when they finally are accepting of the facts and have like they can talk about it again, despite the fact that Louisa told them you're not allowed to talk about your girlfriends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're able to talk about their girlfriends in a civilized manner and come to this incredible connection because of it.
Yeah, yeah. I love it. I think it's great. It's a great coming of age road trip movie. They don't make road
Mhm.
trip movies like this nearly enough, and I don't know how
Yeah.
you get them to make more like it. But people try. Road trip genre is a very popular genre. It's just not one that is easily pulled off because um, a lot of times people don't know where they're going with it. And I forgot to mention it, but Little Miss Sunshine is one that I have
Yes.
so much higher on this
Yeah.
list because I love that movie. And that's just a road trip movie too. So,
Well, I mean, part of the reasons why road trip movies can be so divisive is because a lot of the times we don't get that center ground where it's like the drama aspect mixed with like that the comedy as well. A lot of the times they kind of go into either the slapstick like family comedy or the slapstick college comedy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes it's the road trip movies are very big with college or with horror. They're not, yeah. So that's the hardest part. But I don't have anything else with Y2 Mama. I would just say like, if you haven't seen enough of Cuarón's filmography, check it out and check out Y2 Mama because it's different and it's weird and it was a massive hit when this came out. Like it was a massive hit. And it really put Cuarón on the map. And I'm pretty sure it's the reason why he ended up getting the next Harry Potter movie. But anyway, next week, and John, we haven't even talked about dates, but we'll figure something out. Next week, we're talking about Empire Strikes Back, which is John's number 69. And we were talking about Annie Hall, which is my number 69. So we're diving back a little bit here, getting out of the 2000s for the first time in actually a while. We're going to be talking about 1980, The Empire Strikes Back, and 1977, Annie Hall, which are two movies I'm assuming most people have seen. If you haven't seen Empire, you live under a rock. If you haven't seen Annie Hall, you probably live under a smaller rock, but still, you live under a rock. John hasn't seen Annie Hall, I can tell.
I haven't seen Annie Hall.
Yeah, I can tell already. Or maybe you've just been putting off Woody Allen forever because you don't like Woody Allen as a person, but then, you still should have seen Annie Hall because people didn't start to not like Woody Allen as a person long after you were born. So anyway, Annie Hall and Empire next week. We'll figure out the time. So make sure to follow, to figure out when that's going to be. I'm going to try to watch a lot of movies this weekend because it's Labor Day weekend. And I pretty much don't plan on doing anything Sunday or Monday. So I'm very excited about that. And John, as always, a pleasure. Can't wait to talk about Empire with you and how you have it below The Last Jedi, which is just one of those things, man. It's just one of those things people say, but they don't believe. So I'm going to hang up on you now. And everybody, we will see you next time.